Welcome back to the Nursing Post podcast, All Nursing All the Time with Ashley and Rosa. Today's discussion is on the Stanford Prison Experiment. And of course, our goal is to inform and to spark conversation.
I'm pretty sure that everybody is familiar in some sense with this experiment. It's been published. There have been several movies, I think a bare minimum of at least four. One as recently, I think maybe a year or two ago.
Mhm.
So I think it's well known. But the reason why we decided to do the episode is because even though it's very well known and it's been published and it's still being used as a reference, by the time we get to the end of this episode, you'll probably be asking yourself why.
Exactly. So in 1973, Professor Philip Zimbardo, along with three of his college colleagues from Stanford, decided to conduct this psychological experiment. At the time, there were reported upticks in prison guards mistreating prisoners. So, this brutality is what sparked the experiment. The purpose of the experiment was to determine if the guards were naturally sadistic or if their behavior was a product of their environment, which would be the prison system.
It's almost like a nature nurture situation.
Exactly.
So
Yep.
that's what they were trying to get to the bottom of.
Hmm.
This experiment was actually funded by the US Office of Naval Research, and it took place in the basement at Stanford University in August of 1971. And what they did was they took a basement and turned it into a mock prison. Then they had to advertise for volunteers, and there were about 70 plus applicants that actually signed up to be a participant in this study. They were interviewed, given diagnostic testing to make sure, they didn't have any pre-existing, psychological problems, medical disabilities, or whether they had like a history of crime, alcohol, or drug abuse. Out of the 70 plus applicants and volunteers, 24 were chosen. And believe it or not, they were paid $15 a day for their participation in this experiment. What they did was they took 24 and they equally divided it into two groups, 12, and they did it randomly. So one group of 12 would be prisoners, one group
Hmm.
of 12 would be guards, but then somebody dropped out of the experiment, leaving 11 prisoners and 12 guards.
Which is funny to me because that's nowhere near the statistics that are used in a prison system, but nonetheless.
It's just to me, that's like a group home, not a jail or a
Right.
prison. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yeah.
That's a group home number, so I totally agree with you on that. The prisoners, they were treated like any other criminal, right? They did this, they planned this, they thought this out well. They
Hmm.
went to the homes of the prisoners in police squad cars, that knock from the police when they're banging on your door, the police open up. And they were arrested, they were handcuffed, they were mugshotted, fingerprinted to simulate like the whole real life experience of being arrested.
Hmm.
And after they were processed, they were pretty much stripped of their identity, like the street clothes they came in. They were searched
Hmm.
just like they were in like would have been in a regular prison. They were given gowns with numbers on them to identify themselves instead of using their name. They were given bedding. They actually had a padlock chained on one ankle to make
Right.
them feel like they were prisoners. The guards were given matching khaki uniforms. They were given whistles, billy clubs, and these glasses that were mirrored to avoid making eye contact with the prisoners. And the guards worked in shifts, 3 8-hour shifts, just like
Hmm.
I guess in any nursing facility or something like that. And they were instructed to not physically abuse any of the prisoners, but to maintain law, order, and respect.
So it was interesting the results that came of this. And this is kind of one of the things that is still widely discussed and talked about and used even today. The guards insulted the prisoners. Guards gave prisoners dehumanizing tasks, and they didn't really have any purpose or meaning otherwise than to like assert authority. They were forced to do push ups while the guards either stepped on their backs or either had other prisoners sit on their backs while they did push ups. And prisoners even began ratting other prisoners out to the guards, and they would complain about prison issues. And some would like try to get on the good side of guards and try to get the other prisoners punished. So it was interesting to see this all start up because although they were free to talk about whatever they wanted, mostly what they talked about was this, how, this is not good, that we shouldn't be in here. It was very much a role, I guess, that was played that they really didn't talk about themselves outside of this experiment.
Yeah, I think they kind of, what's that saying? Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. Yeah. I
It
say
was kind
misery
of like
loves
that.
company kind of thing.
Yes.
Yep. So the experiment was to last 14 days. It did not last that long. They only made it to day 6. And to kind of give a little bit of the timeline, at 2:30 the guards would start waking up the prisoners by blowing their whistles. There was a excerpt out of Simple Psychology where there was a prisoner numbered 8612 that within less than 36 hours into the experiment, he began suffering from what they called acute emotional disturbances, disorganized thinking, and uncontrollable crying and rage. And after meeting with the guards, they had told him that he was weak, but they offered him like an informant status. So this 8612 would go to the other prisoners and said, you can't leave, you can't quit. And then soon after that, he really just kind of went off the rails and started acting crazy and was screaming and cursing and going into like these rage fits. And then that's when the psychologist said, no, we need to pull this guy out of the experiment. And that's just interesting because that was day 3. But to kind of go back a little bit, as soon as day 2, these prisoners started to like revolt. I mean, they weren't there 48 hours and they were already like planning their revolt. They were taking off their caps, they were moving their numbers, they would barricade themselves inside of their cells. It's just amazing that in my mind that something would come to pass that quick.
You're right. Less than 2 days. You're
I mean, and
thinking,
something that is not real. Like it's a simulated.
yeah, they signed up, they volunteered for it.
Mhm.
They knew it was an experiment.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. It's just so weird. It's like, how does all this come about in just 36 hours? It's like, how
Mhm.
did the shit hit the fan so quick?
When the prisoners decided to revolt, the guards would use like fire extinguishers. They would undress the prisoners so they were naked. They would remove their beds from their cells, and try to place them like in solitary confinement. Especially those were the ones who were like leading the revolt, the masterminds behind it. So then that way they couldn't, do it again. Guards gave 3 prisoners special privileges and then withheld food with the others. And by day 4, 3 prisoners had become so traumatized that they were released from the experiment. And then, like I had said previously, the whole experiment was cut off at day 6.
It was supposed to be a 2-week experiment.
Right. It
That's the
didn't make
thing
it a
that
week, not
it didn't
even
even make it 7
halfway.
days.
Right. The first thing I thought when I read this is you knew you signed up for an experiment. You knew, like, the prisoners knew that they weren't going to be harmed by the guards. They knew that that was not part of the plan.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't understand why people would go crazy and, unless there was probably some underlying something going on there to be like, no, like, I'm not doing like, I would just be like, "No, like, I know you can't hurt me. I'm just sitting here chilling, like, whatever. It's experiment. I can always tap out." I guess my mindset is just a little bit different, and of course, it's all 2020 looking back at an experiment that was done in the early '70s, but I'm like, how in the world did things go so bad within 3 days of starting an experiment that everybody knew was pretty much, in my opinion, role play?
I think I kind of feel the same way that you do. I'm just like, how did this? I think the thought and the intent was well, but how that is. I just don't know it got to how it went from 0 to 100 so quickly.
Mhm.
I I mean, of course, I think at on some level I expected maybe what the outcome was in these 6 days, but not so quickly. I thought maybe there would be more time that had lapsed before it had gotten to that extent or that point.
Mhm.
And then it makes me wonder, like, what exact instructions? Like, I would love to have been the fly on the wall because even though these guards were told, you can't physically harm anybody, you can't physically touch
Mhm.
anybody. How quick they were to like dig into that role, for
Right.
lack of a better word.
Right.
And the same with the prisoners. I mean, they were informants, they were ratting each other out, they
Mhm.
were, all in a matter of less than 7 days. Like,
I mean,
it's
for people who
baffling.
don't know each other, it just seems awful odd. It just seems like a weird experiment to me. The fact that this has made so much headway in psychology as like, hey, you're a product of your environment kind of thing. This is a proof that if you get put in a bad situation, you'll do bad things. I mean, this is very well researched and people like use this as, well, look at this. It's not him. It was just the fact that he was put in a bad situation. It's not her. She wouldn't have been like this had she not been in this situation. I don't know if that's true. I mean, that just seems that there's not enough here for me to use this as
I don't think it should ever have made
reputable.
it to publication, in
Right.
my opinion. Like,
And
I
that
don't
is
understand. And it
right.
is published, and
Mhm.
it's all like, you literally Google it, it's everywhere. Like,
Mhm.
everybody knows what this is. I mean, 4 movies later, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Documentaries later. The thing that kills me about this is, to me, there's like no scientific method in this. How are you supposed to, like, the whole purpose of science is that each and every single time you're supposed to be able to get the same response over and over. Like, you have a controlled and you have a non-controlled. You
Mhm.
compare, you study. 1 plus 1 equals 2. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Like, that's the whole point of the scientific method. How would anybody be able to replicate this and get the exact same experience? I don't think you can. And then on top of that, I don't
Mhm.
think you can because the person who's actually supposed to be the scientist and the psychologist doing this experiment is acting like the freaking prison warden. Like, come
Right.
on, a break. Isn't that like a conflict of interest? How is that a controlled study when you're in the
Well,
freaking study yourself?
it's not. I mean, and it's now come out that certain people were like, well, the guards were told to be cruel and the prisoners were acting crazy, that they really weren't going crazy. I mean, I don't know. It's just weird to me that people would still use this with knowing that it's been ultimately debunked. The American Psychology Association had said that after that they have looked at this, that it was incredibly flawed.
Yeah, it also said it should have died an early death. I mean, I thought 6 days was early, but apparently, apparently they're thinking it should have died way
Mhm.
before the 6 days.
Mhm. And you would think, okay, well, if it's been debunked by the American Psychology Association, then nobody's really still using that. Well, no, I actually did find where this Dr. Michael Fortino, he actually published something in the Criminal Legal News in November of 2020 stating that, quote, we see this every day in America's prisons. And then he also said that, quote, many guards as well as police officers undergo a kind of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde metamorphosis when they begin their shift. Some guards arrive into a prison yard with a certain vengeance against their captives, and that they take a role of a disciplinarian driven by a personal crusade to punish those in prison for their previous misdeeds. This prison experiment is setting a wrong tone because this guy is saying, "Oh, look, there was this research that showed that it's your environment. And that's why we're having these issues with police officers and prison guards."
So I used to work at a tool store. That's actually how I put myself through nursing school. So I worked with like nothing but guys, which was cool because sometimes girls can be catty, and when you fight with girls, there's resentment and this, that, and the third. And when guys fight, they argue and then they're like, "Hey, you want to get a beer after work?" Type of situation. But I remember I did work with this one guy who actually worked in the city jail,
Mhm.
and he was going to school to finish his criminal law so that he could have advancement within the jail system. And I asked him, I said, how can you go to work every day
Mhm.
and work in an environment of, people who are pretty much, delinquents and menaces to society? And something that he said to me that stuck to me and stuck with me all this time is he said the only way that he could do it in an ethical and moral way was that he treated them all the same. And the only way he could do that was
Mhm.
by not knowing what they were in for.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
while the other guards and the other staff would like ask like what are you in for or how long are you in, like he didn't ask those questions. So he thought by not asking the questions and not knowing this person's in here for murder, this person's in here for shoplifting, this person's in here for like assault or
Right.
rape or something like that, that he would be able to treat them all morally, ethically. And that's stuck to me even to this day.
I'm very
I
much
think
that way.
I am too. And I
Mhm.
use that so much in nursing, and that has stuck with me. I give him praise because, in a lot of situations, it's not that.
It's not easy to do necessarily.
It's not at all.
And so many people are like, "Oh, but you're nurses, is that what you're supposed to be there?" We're still humans. We're all, no matter what you do for a job, you're still human. You still have questions.
Hmm.
It still can bother you.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the better question for the experiment would have been something based on bias,
Right.
not necessarily this debacle.
Exactly. I think that this guy may have had good intentions, but first off, you should have removed yourself from the experiment. Like you said, he was like the prison ward, so you already have a bias. And then some people say that they had like pre-done this whole kind of theory in his class several months earlier. And that this experiment was to pretty much say, yeah, my theory was right, that I had said
Yeah, he
this.
wanted validation.
There you go. That's what I was looking for. And so it's interesting to see this. And now people are coming out saying, no, that's not right. No, this isn't right. So we have people that were actively involved in this experiment who are saying, no, they told us to do this. They told us to do that. And interestingly enough, from what I can understand, this guy does still stand behind his work.
Which is crazy because, the people who have debunked it and have criticized it, they said this experiment should have been pulled way before day 6. The moment that, things became physical,
Mhm.
it should have ended at that point, and I'm not in disagreement.
Because you were told essentially that there was going to be no harm, no this, no that. Like you were told all these things. So why would you give them billy clubs then? Is
Great
it like a
point.
scare tactic? Like I'm not sure what the thought process was with that. So it's interesting.
It is interesting. Like we said, he may have set out with good intentions, but that's definitely not the outcome of it. I'm still surprised that it is being used in colleges around the country. And I hope that when they are studying this, that they are also telling students that this has like no merit in the scientific world, that it's not replicable. You will not get the same outcome every time. There's no science behind it.
Mhm.
And I just hope that they're doing the ethical thing in regards to this experiment and the studying of it.
I agree. I think that that's something that if it's not being done, that program probably shouldn't be looked into since it's not following the most up-to-date guidelines for teaching their up and coming students.
I agree. For more information, please visit our website at www.thenursingpostpodcast.com, and you'll be able to find our references, our episodes, and you'll be able to subscribe to our website. You can subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. You're more than welcome to leave your thoughts and your comments. And of course, we thank you for always listening to the Nursing Post.